Good morning, friends. Good morning to those in the US and good evening to those in South Asia, especially in India. Thank you for joining us, and we are grateful for your presence and participation. This is a kind of long awaited dream coming true, and dream that, of course, has come to fruition in many contexts, especially with Philip Peacock of World Communion of Reformed Churches, that brought both communities, African Americans and Dalits, together, in which Rodney was a part of the core team, the consultation. And thank you to our panelists. Reverend Dr. John Prabhakar, who has just joined. Good evening. And Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler, since both of who I admire, and my colleague Rodney teaches the Bible at our campus in Charlotte and has written several works, but one of them, Can a Cushite Change His Skin? A race, ethnicity, and othering in the Hebrew. And Dr. Prabhakar with his books, and one of which is Preaching Contextually, a case with rural Dalits in India. He's a principal of Andhra Christian Theological College. And here is a webinar sponsored by Union Presbyterian Seminary and ACTC, Andhra Christian Theological College. And welcome. Before I start off, just for you to know my colleagues and what they think about what they're talking about, this is going to be a conversation about two forms of slavery, bondage, a dehumanization that continues in two contexts. One in the name of caste, another in the name of race. Pervasive dominant ideologies, but I would appreciate if both panelists would define what they mean by, of course, now you get to start off my colleague, Dr. Rodney, on how you define racism so that we are on the same page, that the audience know what you believe and I know what you believe, followed by Dr. John Prabhakar on how he defines casteism or caste system.
Well, thank you, James, for that question. It's wonderful to join you this morning. I know it's night there, so Dr. John, let me apologize for keeping you up late. So when I think about racism, I think about a system that's in place that provides undue advantage to some while providing undue disadvantage to others. Racism is an appearance-based system, the way it's manifested in the US, an appearance-based system that attributes people in a different hierarchical relationship. And based upon their position in the hierarchical relationship, it determines who gets access to power, to privilege, and to wealth in our context. When I think about racism, racism is only possible from the position of the empowered in a racialized system. So racism is the manifestation of the exercise of power premised on prejudice in a racialized system. Therefore, in the United States, a white dominant system, whites who can control the power over the larger system are able to enforce a racist paradigm against others within this system. And literally, it tends to function based upon not just your phenotype, i.e. your physical type, not just your somatic type, but so the way that these are perceived in the context. So color, hair curl, these things seem to shape the idea of what race is. And race provides that hierarchical relationship that allows people to exercise power within that larger system. So that's really what I'm thinking about when I think about racism in our context.
Thank you, thank you. John Prabhakar.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. So in the title, we kept caste and casteism. Of course, we in India, we discuss more on under the title caste and casteism and all these things. In fact, to go back to the roots, Varna system. Varna is color, just like what our friend is sharing. So when Aryan, 1500 BC, they came to India from northern part. They are white in one way, and the locals are called as Avarnas, no color, no Varna, no color. That is the basic understanding, and it is a very age-old one, not like recent development. Generations together, Indians suffer with this system. So in Varna system, of course, Aryans invaded into India 1500 BC, and afterwards it is going on. There was a division between Aryans and non-Aryans. Aryans are migrated ones, and non-Aryans are native people. This is about Varna. Then caste, coming to caste, caste is a Latin word, of course, it has its roots in Latin, casta, that is pure. So casteism, the word coining this word is purity in the blood and impurity in the blood. So this was the thing. In the Varna system, especially according to Manu Dharma Shastra, law of Manu, or Torah of Manu in Christian words, the society is divided into 4 Varnas: Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. Only 4. And even in the creation theory also, Brahmins are created from Brahma's head, and Kshatriya, shoulders of God, and Vaishya, somewhere from the chest or abdomen, and Shudra are from the legs of God. So, the origin is from the God. Brahmins, they come from the head. These are from shoulders. And Vaishya come from the... In fact, these 3 are called upper caste: Brahman, Kshatriya, and Vaishya. And whereas Shudra are called as slaves. Slaves means not upper caste one. Now the thing comes outside the Varna, Avarna. Who comes outside the Varna system? When the marriages took place in between these Varnas, the people who came out because of the syncretism or intermarriages, they are called outcasts or Avarnas outside the caste system or Varna system. Those are called outsiders. That is the basic thing. In India, the society, this Varna system prevails, perpetuates, because it was imposed by Hinduism, and Hinduism is the dominant religion in Indian society, and its culture is a dominant culture in Indian society. The marriages are being controlled within the Varna system. One caste person can marry the same caste person. Because of marriage system is controlled, there is no chance to jump on lower caste person or outcast person into caste system, caste people, or into a Shudra or into a Vaishya, somewhere. There is no possibility. And again, the color doesn't matter now. Of course, basically Varna and Varnashrama, Dharma and all these things come. Now, there is no question of color. Even Dalits also, there are white people, brown people, black people. So here the color doesn't matter. The caste is matter. The outcast, they cannot jump in to any higher level social order in any manner. They cannot do restricted through the marital system. That is the thing. Now coming to outcast, the new word is being coined by our social scientists or leaders of these outcast people. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he coined a name called Dalit for these outcast people. Dalit literally means crack, open, slit, etc. Even as burst, broken, downtrodden, scattered, crushed, destroyed, etc. So we take, the Dalits take, or outcasts take this name to explain our social condition. Dalit is not the word coined by Varnashrama system or some other system. The outcast people, they took this name, Dalit, to express their social status in the given society. The Dalit is being used in all kind of deliberations like this. The outcast, one thing what I have been telling, you cannot crisscross, you cannot move about. It is restricted, generations together being restricted. Then, in the social order, the upper caste, they have divided. India is agriculture-based society. So, they have divided occupations according to the caste. Brahmin, the top man, represents Brahma, God. He is the top person. He monitors the society. And second level, Kshatriya is a ruler, is a politician. He protects the society through waging wars and all these things. The third one, Vaishya, he supplies the needs. So he's a business person. Third one is a business person. And the fourth one is a slave, even though they are being called as Shudra, they are coming up because of certain reasons. Then the society is being controlled economically also. Of course, one or two things I will highlight and close. One thing is economic system. In India, traditionally, land is owned by God. God is the owner of land. But who represents God? That is the question. God is the owner. That was the understanding. The thing is, who represents God in Indian society is a Brahmin. So ultimately, Brahmins claimed their ownership over the land. So controlling the financial system of the society. Later, because of this controlling system, they could not maintain the land because it says about purity and pollution. They need to touch leather goods, and leather instruments used in agriculture. So because of that, they became scared of becoming polluted, ritually polluted because touching leather. So they could not maintain the land ownership. Finally, the ownership is given away to Upper Shudra. That is different. Then Upper Shudras, they manipulated Brahmins, they grabbed the land, and they became owners of the land. Politically, in India, even Indian National Congress was dominated by Brahmins from top to bottom. Recently, we also in Telangana celebrating P.V. Narasimha Rao as a great prime minister. He became prime minister and maintained it only because he was a Brahmin. So political system was also dominated by Brahmin system. One or two thoughts and I will close. And because of that, the economic system is being dominated by Upper Shudras in the later stage. They could grab, because of their financial ability, the political leadership. So political leadership is going on by Upper Shudra, Reddy, Kamma, and so on, the Upper Shudra. What about Dalits? Dalits in India, they cannot move on the social ladder towards upper level. They have tried economical, they have been trying to come up economical and politically. It is not becoming possible. One thing preventing them is atrocities over Dalits. Attacking physically, killing the people, developing certain kind of fear within them, not to come up, to maintain status quo, and all these things. Today, Dalit, something we repeatedly talk about is atrocities over Dalit. So here I will stop, and so that our moderator may help to move on this thing.
I just wanted to comment. Thank you for that wonderful description of casteism and the way that caste works. I really appreciated the detail that you went into there. As I'm listening to this, I hear a certain similarities immediately. One of which is the way that you talk about Dalit identity as brokenness, slickness, some sort of crushed nature that describes the way that people function in society based upon that position. It seems to resonate with the way that Blackness has been imagined in the United States over time. Blackness in the ideological systems in the US represents something that is disempowered, that is evil or bad within the larger system, whereas whiteness is empowered, it's good, it's pure, et cetera, et cetera. So that notion of purity seems to work in both societies pretty well. Another thing that stood out to me was that both of these systems are undergirded by a very elaborate ideological system, i.e., it's not based upon anything outside of our own acceptance of a system that maintains this. We have an ideology in place that enables us to enact these grotesque policies in both countries that is premised primarily on the consent of those who live within it. So I wonder if, as we have these conversations, we might find a way to think about how do we undo this ideology as a way of beginning to make the shifts in the social policies that reinforce these systems.
Yeah, thank you both. And of course, for those who have joined us when definition was taken, when both the gentlemen were defining these isms, welcome and good morning, good evening. As far as of course, it's difficult to summarize the systems, but this is a social system based on an ideology, to understood both. One based on color, appearance, giving people, telling them the ranking, where they stand in the society, giving some privilege and access to power, resources, and it's hierarchical, restricted mobility. Another one, caste system, which divides, tells where you should live, what you should do, who you should sleep with, and where you stand in the society, and where do you have access to power and resources if there is any. Basically, the second one, Dalits being not just appearance but by birth. This caste system is, and both of them have some kind of blessings from religion, or religion has been used.
Yes.
To say some are purer, some are dirtier. Okay? Some are superior, some are not. Some are inherently smarter and some are not. So that's where I think religion comes into. I would, of course, there are already people asking these questions, and I want this to be much more interactive, that we respond to people. Can you identify a site or two where, of course, these are one we are talking about a 3.5 millennia and a system that evolved, another one close to 500 years, more than 100 years, a system that evolved today as we sit. Can you please identify a site or two where race or caste manifests itself? Let's start with Dr. John Prabhakar, then to Dr. Rodney.
Yeah, can I catch your point again, because the net here is very poor. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Where we can start?
Where do we see, just give an example or two examples of caste system playing itself in reality, society, or in our life, everyday life?
Yeah, yeah. So the Dalits, they thrive for dignity, self-dignity. That is the thing. So when Christian missionaries came to Indian subcontinent, masses of Dalits responded, thinking that this religion may provide certain kind of dignity to live. So, of course, there may be questions that Christians will divide and all these things, discrimination in Christian religion, and many things may come out. But in Indian context, from Dalit perspective, people responded to gospel in masses, just seeking self-dignity. So even today, the same thing. same thing happening. A Dalit may become President of India or something like. Constitutionally, we may claim certain things. Dignity is deprived. They are looked down. You come up educationally, economically, politically, and whatever may be the thing. You are psychologically looked down by the upper. That is the thing. I think the same is, this may be the similar experience in American context also regarding racism. So, can I say this is a thriving for self-legal?
Okay, thank you.
So, I mean, I just think about, when I think about racism, the manifestation of racism in America, I think there's no clearer examples than we've seen in the last several weeks. We are in the midst of two converging crises, which have both manifest the evidence of racism in America. COVID-19, as it is broken out and spread across the United States, one of the things that we've seen is the disparate impact on people in Black and brown skin, particularly African Americans, have been hit hard by this disease. Now, early on, there was a great attempt to make sure that we did not associate this with some sort of genetic inferiority, some biological predisposition to this disease, but to recognize that it had to do with something about the nature of the way that people live. So early on, this was accredited to the disproportionate instance of health maladies in African Americans. So people talked about the fact that African Americans are more prone to diabetes, to asthma, to hypertension, to these diseases. And they said, well, this is the basis of why they not only are becoming more so impacted by this, but they're also succumbing more regularly. But as you began to go on and look into this, it became clear that it wasn't these underlying health conditions that are just quote unquote Black issues. It has to do with the fact that there's significant economic challenges based upon the way that we've been racialized, i.e. African Americans are far more likely to have to work jobs they can't work from home than are white Americans. African Americans are far more likely to work jobs in quote unquote necessary industries, service industries, than are white Americans. African Americans often have less income, which means less likely to have the ability to have their own cars and things of that nature. So they're more dependent on things like public transportation, which would mean you're more likely to be susceptible to disease and the spread of disease. African Americans who might work full-time may not be able to afford healthcare. And particularly in states like North Carolina, where we've denied Medicaid expansion, there's significant portions of the population who can't get access to healthcare until their crisis becomes acute and you have to go to the emergency room. So people are, African Americans who might contract COVID are waiting much longer before they're able to gain access to healthcare. All of these things have nothing to do with biology, have nothing to do with genetics, but have to do with the way that the system works. And the system disadvantages people in a significant way. And therefore, we see the disparate health outcomes in the midst of this pandemic. The other major crisis intersecting crisis that I talked about is the George Floyd uprising. The George Floyd uprising came as a result of the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, by a police officer with his knee on George's neck. This becomes a wonderful metaphor for the nature of the way that African Americans have lived for 401 years in this country, with a knee on our proverbial neck, with this notion of disadvantage, of oppression that persists, that literally is killing us. We can't breathe underneath this system. This is manifest through police violence, but the police are just one instance in a much larger racialized system. It becomes the focal point at some instances, but the nature of the way that African Americans and police have related in this country has been problematic since the inception of policehood. Many people talk about the origins of policehood coming from the fugitive slave groups, these groups that used to go out and capture fugitive slaves, enslaved people, not slaves, enslaved people, and bring them back into captivity. And this is the basis of the way that policing is done. So there's an inherent bias that's in the midst of policing in America from the beginning that sort of sets it at odds with African American people. Whereas the larger population tends to think about police as those who protect and serve, those who we need to look up to. African Americans have often thought about the police as those we need to fear, those we might be in any point in time subject to death. I wrote on my Facebook page a couple of weeks ago the experience I had maybe about, this about 2 or 3 weeks ago, driving through a rural Southern community and having a state trooper latch himself to my bumper. I mean, literally drive his car right behind my car for some 10 to 12 miles, just following me to see if I would speed, if I would stop in an inappropriate place, to have a reason. I mean, it's this sort of fear that exists in the midst of a society as to what can happen to us at any given point in time with the police officers. Now, I would say that these are examples of the way that racism manifests, but they're by no means significant in defining the fullness of the impact of racism in America. If we were to look at the fullness, we would have to examine all the systems. We'd have to examine the education system, and the kinds of imbalance between what you get, even in a city like Charlotte. So here in the city of Charlotte, we recognize that there's a different kind of education that you're going to get at the wealthy white Audrey Kell High School than you're going to get if you're at a poor school like Garinger, or a poor school like North Mecklenburg High School. There's a different kind of education within the same system, different opportunities that are provided in different places, different resourcing for different institutions. And this undermines, let's say, the education system. We could look at employment and note that there's always a significant imbalance. African Americans are likely to make roughly 60% of what white Americans make doing the same jobs. African Americans in this nation have 1/10 the wealth of whites on average. And this is due to generational policies and practices. For example, the GI Bill, which was a major factor in enabling whites to gain access to the middle class by purchasing property, did not avail itself to African Americans who weren't able to take advantage. The Social Security system, when it initially went into effect, kept people who were domestic workers and farm workers from participating in the system. By and large, disproportionately high numbers of African Americans were domestics or workers on agricultural farms and weren't able to participate in the system. So it enabled whites to gain access to wealth and to perpetuate wealth where blacks weren't able to participate. This over the years has culminated in a much larger economic disparity that we can see. So literally, if we look at each and every system that we have in place in the United States of America, we'll begin to see the disadvantages that African Americans face in the larger system. So it's a systemic issue, a systemic concern that manifests itself in multiple ways.
Thank you, eloquently put. Every system has a site of oppression, of racism. And thank you, Prabhakar Garu, for identifying the church is not immune to this caste system, in the sense, of course, people have sought dignity and joined the church only to find themselves amidst caste system there within. And thank you. Of course, yesterday I was looking at these numbers of other sites. Every 16 minutes, one crime against a Dalit. Each day, at least 3 Dalit women are raped, only registered rapes, others are not registered. Every week, 6 Dalits kidnapped, and every day, at least 2 Dalits murdered. These are cases that are registered. Of course, there are many that go unregistered because either police refuse to take those cases or the local administration says, no, we will take care of it. We'll settle the matter. Thank you. And I think it's the right time, because people are already asking us questions, that we move towards responding to these questions.
Certainly.
And here I see, starting with Peter, who's asking, it's happening in church. They're talking about casteism in the church, where congregations decide who their preachers should be, depending on their caste identity. He is telling, how do you respond to that? How to overcome that in our church?
Can I Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, within the church, now the discussion is coming up, the discrimination within the church. Of course, even today, on record, we can say more than 80% of Dalits are Christians, or among Dalit Christians, are among Christians, 80% are Dalits. It's okay. Now the thing is coming up because of this globalization and people's movement around the globe, seeking employment and other things. Even the upper caste people also getting into Christian faith. It's very low profile. We cannot say masses are jumping in. No, very low profile. So the casteism within the church is two ways. The Brahmanic ideology divided Dalits into sub-castes. That is one problem. They were very much scared that the sub-castes, they come together, they will become strong in India. Like in Andhra Pradesh, Madigas and Malas are united during early days of 1985, and after that, the Dalit movement was very strong. And later it was divided and became weak. So within, among Dalits, there are sub-castes. That is one problem. The other one is Christians among upper caste and Dalits. It is true that the upper caste, after owning Christian faith in their life, they really seek a ready Christian community, look for a ready Christian pastor. Again, among Dalits, a Mala congregation look for a Mala pastor. Madiga, this thing, they look for a Madiga pastor. See, among Dalits, looking for their own subcaste people to be their pastors, and the division, to maintain the division, it is the conspiracy of Brahmanic ideology. We cannot blame the subcaste. Subcaste they should be conscious, more conscious about the damage that being made because of this division. But regarding the upper caste, even today and continuing, it is continuing. A Chaudhary community wants a Chaudhary pastor, and Dalit community, Dalit pastor. If Dalit pastor is invited to a Southern community, the pastor will be looked down. That is the situation what our friend Peter raised. It is true. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Dr. Sadler, Dr. Anuparthi, and I shared with this anonymous attendee this question. Can either of you see a time when racism and caste system will no longer exist? Dr. Sadler,
Yes.
what do you anticipate will result from the current racial reckoning in America in terms of systemic change?
So let me begin this question by saying I'm an eternal optimist. I am one who does believe that the system can change. I'm one who recognizes that race is not a perpetual situation in the world. It did not always exist. Race and its manifestations have recurred at different points in time. I would say that there's a racialized kind of system in the caste system, racialized systems in places like Japan. But what we think about as race in America and in the European context developed at a specific point in time as Europeans were setting out to colonize the world, to take land from people and to take people from land. It became a means of justifying and legitimating that. Inasmuch as this is true, race has a pretty clear origin. We know when it started. We know when the system came into being. We know that it is a synthetic category, not natural, not God-given. It is human-made for human reasons. It justifies inequality, and it allows a system to perpetuate itself based upon this premise. Because of this, because we know of its distinctive origins and the way that it came into being in order to serve oppressive purposes, I would definitely say, A, it's possible to move beyond race. It's possible to get out of the conundrum we found ourselves in. We've lived with it for a long time now, but this is not forever, and systems like this can change. And I also want to say that we as people have the power to change such systems. We as people have the power to redefine the world in which we live. Whether we claim that power, whether we own that power, is something different. I think that we're at a crucial juncture right now. The aftermath of the George Floyd uprisings have been significant, and perhaps it's special because they've been the intersecting crises. The COVID-19 has given people the opportunity to stay at home and to pay attention to what's going on with the George Floyd uprisings. So we're paying attention to race in a way that we have perhaps never done, at least not since the 1960s, the civil rights movement, et cetera, et cetera. We're paying attention to race in a way that's even different than we did during the Barack Obama original campaign for presidency. We're paying attention to race right now in a very significant way. Inasmuch as this is so, I believe that change is possible. I believe that this is a kairotic moment, a pregnant moment in time that might give birth to some significant change if we dedicate ourselves to looking at it. Now, one of the things that we can't do is we can't fall back to our basic fail-safes, which we usually do at these points in time. So, for example, we had the killing of Mike Brown in Ferguson, outside of St. Louis. And we put in place commissions that looked at the nature of the way that policing takes place. We put in place new systems. We're going to make sure that police have cameras on them. We're going to make sure that they have de-escalation tactics. And we think that the system's going to change. No, we can't allow for those to be the only responses. I often say this way. A few years ago, I planted a rose bush right next to my mailbox out front. I thought it'd be beautiful. It'd have beautiful roses and it'd be lovely. But as it grew thorns, and the mail carriers would come around and get pricked on it. And they asked me to take it down. So I eventually cut my rose bush down. About 6 months later, the rose bush was back. I cut it down at the end of the season, thinking it wouldn't be back in the spring. In the spring, it came back. Eventually, I began to realize that I couldn't just cut the rose bush down. I had to dig out the root. This is the same thing that we see when we deal with race. We often deal with the manifestations on the outside. We deal with racism, but we don't deal with the root, which is race itself. We need to begin to deal with the concept that people are subdivided into different categories, that these categories are God-given and legitimate, and that these categories have some sense of validity. This is the idea that has to be rooted out if we're to fundamentally make change in the way that we deal with race in America. So yes, I believe that we can get past race. It's going to take dedicated attention. It's going to take an ideological shift, and it's going to take examining every system in our society to think about modes of redress to get beyond the way that we're looking at race. My proposal is for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission across the country and in every community that can begin to look at the way that race is manifest. I think if we finally do have that long-awaited conversation on race that really does dig down to the root of it and gets the ideology, that fundamental core ideology out, I think we can actually have success in getting past race.
Thank you. And now to my colleague in Charlotte, Adrian Bird, who asked us a question. Hi, Adrian. Racism and casteism have both depended on divine sanction, attributed divine sanction to survive. Many have internalized this narrative as normative. How does one deconstruct, dispel such powerful, dangerous narratives? So how are you going to get rid of this myth that God has sanctioned casteism or racism? Quickly, if you can respond. I think we have one more question. I think we can take one more question after that.
So John, do you want to take this first?
In India, in India, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has written a wonderful book. It was a very wonderful work. That is Annihilation of Caste. How to remove the caste discrimination from Indian side. He categorically said, unless Hinduism is destroyed, it is not possible. So now in fact, we cannot say because we are living in India as a minority Christians or Dalit Christians, we cannot make comments like B.R. Ambedkar. So caste or divine ordination of caste and ruining one caste and we can come out from caste. But there
I think we might have lost John again. Let me jump in for a little bit on this question. John's back. Let's see.
yeah. There will be formation among our Hindu brethren and sisters because it has been being blamed. Even today, a Dalit cannot enter a Hindu temple unless give some declaration and all the other things. Even the constitution say that you can enter a Hindu temple. It is not allowed. Or after entering into a Hindu temple, if you after coming out, they do some purifying ritual because a Dalit entering into a Hindu temple, it impures, pollutes the temple. That is their belief even today. So religion deeply upholds the caste system in India. That is major religion. Unless there is a reformation and enlightenment within the religious propagators or upholders, it is not that much what we say optimistic. That is true. Many of our friends know. And of course, regarding COVID-19, one small comment, if moderated. In India, lockdown took place in all departments except agriculture, including Prime Minister and everybody said agriculture work is expected because it is necessary. Who are being
I think we lost.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
in Dalit agricultural laborers, those who field. That is reality. And mostly rural Dalits are very much engaged in this particular situation in India. The report cases in the mass media
We lost him. Rodney, would you chip in, please? Yeah.
So I think that you're right. There is a fundamental system that has, as race has been developed, as race was developed years ago as a concept, it originally started off as something that was thought to be scientific. It was reinforced by, again, different ideologies along that line. But I think its most insidious manifestation has been as a theological concept. Certain texts were read from the Bible, like Genesis chapter 9, the curse of quote unquote Ham, the Ephesians chapter 6, verses 5 through 8, the slaves obey your masters passage, in ways that reinforced a racialized system in America. The church was fundamentally complicit. Frederick Douglass notes this at the appendix of his 1845 narrative life of Frederick Douglass, when he talks about the fact that the church provided a thin veneer of cover for the racist system, the slavocracy in the American South. So the church has been fundamentally complicit in the evolution of a racialized system in America. Some people will talk about the fact that segregation and notions of segregation don't begin in larger society, they begin in the church. The church, which became a segregated body, was the first manifestation of segregation in the United States. In this regard, if we're to deal with the issue of race, we're going to have to begin to undo the theological damage that's been done. The fact that people have utilized God to legitimate an unjust system. We need to begin to address that. Our own seminary has played a particular role in this with Robert Louis Dabney's A Defense of Virginia, written years ago, that basically established the way that the church in the American South viewed issues of race for the better part of 100 years. There's much work that needs to be done within the church. The church itself needs to begin to say, how have we participated in a racialized system, number one? In what ways do the practices and traditions that we have trace themselves back to a racist root? One of our own colleagues, Bill Sweetser, in his book on the history of Union Presbyterian Seminary, talks about the spiritualization of the church, i.e. that we are supposed to, that we tend to think about the only role that the church has is to play in this world is not to talk about social policies on the outside of the church, but spiritual lives and the souls within. This has manifested itself throughout our society in a particularly negative way. And in as much as we tend to think about the church not having a role to play in dealing with larger issues like race. So I think that there's much work that the church has to do to examine its own racial history and to begin to reimagine its theology, to read people like James Cone or Kelly Brown Douglas, to allow them to come into the larger discourse about the way that we think about theology in America and to reimagine theology in America in a significant way. I could talk for hours about this. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we'll take one more question and read the other one. Question from Dorcas Gordon. You have spoken at length about Brahmin and Dalits. Could you say a little more about other castes in the middle? Of course, there are more than two there. Whether they form a bridge in any way between the other two. Have they managed to change the rules of their particular caste given their middle position in the system? This is a question for Dr. Prabhakar. That there are more than just Brahmins and Dalits, there are castes in between. Of course, these are categories. And in each category, there are hundreds of castes in between. What role do they play in either cementing the system or dismantling the system?
Yeah, that's a very good question. In fact, in between Brahmins and outcasts, so Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra are there. So Kshatriya and Vaishya are also the same along with the Brahmins. They have given similar status. Regarding Shudra, because they are within the caste system, they are permitted to enjoy the religious sanction. They can enter into the temple. They can do worship with the god, mainly in gods and goddesses. And the rituals they can perform, and Brahmin will come and perform rituals to them. Only because the outcasts are said to be ritually impure. Dalits are said to be ritually impure by definition. They are not allowed into the religious system of this major community. It is going on. This was only the reason during the missionary, foreign mission and missionary work time. Only because of that, most of the Dalits entered into the church. So even today, the middle persons, what you have told, they are caste people. They are labeled as caste people. The Shudras are also caste people. But Dalits are outcasts. They have no caste at all, outcast. Illegally born, that is the word they use. illegally born. Because Mahatma Gandhi also tried to label them as Harijan, God's children. The name usually is given to the children born to the temple prostitutes. They do not know temple prostitutes. They become wives to everybody under the name of God. They give birth to children. So who is their father? It is said that God's children. The same name Gandhi has given to the outcast, Harijan, God's children. And very, what we say, insulting name he has given. So Dalits rejected that name. They are not using that name. So outcast, outside the caste system, they have no right within the caste religious system also. They are not allowed to enter into the temple, and Brahmins will not come and perform any ritual for the outside caste people. Because of that, they entered the church, and Dalits has become pastors and leaders from the church. It's going on. Okay, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And I think I'll read one more question and conclude. And for those whose internet has been poor, I think they are recording webinar and they send it to you later. You get to watch it. And thank you, Roger Gens, for your comments as well. One comment from Melissa, which is in chat, which says, can there be a religion which is not political? Of course, there's a powerful question. One thing that I think this is something for us to dwell on, in the sense, if all social relationships are organized according to religion, and if politics is something is defined as ordering of relationships, can there be a religion which is not political? Is another question to ask. And before concluding, one thing that we are committed to, both Dalits, African Americans, and all our allies. It's not just one community or two communities. We have all allies all around. We are committed to continue the struggle, agitate, organize wherever we can, and educate. In our field, theology too, we have to deconstruct some of the theologies that we have cherished. And this agenda would go on, and there is hope. Okay. Thank you, each of you panelists, for Rodney and John for being here, and all the participants for your participation and the lively and thoughtful questions that you have asked and the comments that you gave. Thank you, and have a good day to those in the US and good night to those in India. Thank you. Bye then.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
God bless you all.
Yes.
Yeah.